Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to my booth. My name's Jay, and today we are going to run through EQ, equalizers, how you can use them on your voiceovers, your audiobook narration, whatever it is you're putting your lovely voice to make you sound better, a little bit cleaner, and just more like your own darn self. Before we dive in, if you like this stuff and you find it helpful, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple seconds, clicking those buttons down there, you know, it helps other folks find us, and we appreciate it. And if you want to support us in other ways, you can do that directly via the description below. Check it out if you're feeling generous. Let's dive in, shall we? So I've got Adobe Audition open here, but all the things that I'm going to talk about and cover will apply to any recording software, any DAW that you prefer to use. The mechanics may be slightly different depending on your weapon of choice, but the principles will be the same. So to start off, what is an EQ? What does it do? Well, let me pull a couple open here and we'll talk through it. So these are two different equalizers, and they do the same exact thing, just in slightly different ways. And what an EQ does is it allows me to either boost or amplify or turn up the volume on certain bands of frequency, certain sound frequencies, or conversely, turn down the volume or attenuate. So on this one on the top, I've got all my frequency of sounds along the top here, and they're each corresponding with these dials. And I can grab one of these and turn up the volume on a frequency of sound, or conversely, I can turn down the volume. And then down here at the bottom, it's showing me how many decibels I'm either boosting, amplifying, or attenuating, turning down the volume on whatever frequency I so choose. This is a graphic equalizer. And then at the bottom, this is a parametric equalizer. Again, same thing, slightly different process. And I can grab one of these nodes, boost, turn up the volume, or attenuate, turn down the volume on these frequencies of sound. Now, the main difference between a parametric equalizer and a graphic is this bell curve. It's adjusting the frequency of sound not just at this node, but also underneath this whole curve, which, if I take all these other ones away, you can see very clearly when I adjust the shape of the curve, which just gives me a lot more fluidity, a lot more flexibility there. I can also change where this node is centered, turning it down, turning it up, changing where it rests. And I just find this one to be more to my personal preference. It's a personal choice. So now the question is, now that we know sort of what an EQ does, what's the goal with an EQ? What are we trying to do by applying equalizers to our voiceovers, our audiobooks, whatever it may be? Well, we'll start by saying what we're not trying to do. I'm not trying to use an EQ to make myself sound like something that I'm not. So for example, if I want to do a movie trailer read, make myself sound like this summer coming to a movie theater near you, and I use an EQ to make myself sound really cool, really boomy, really bassy in that world, and it sounds great. The reason why that's an issue is if I get hired and someone says, Jay, we loved your movie theater voice read, and then I have to come back to them and say, great, happy to do it for you. Here's the EQ and effects rack you'll need to make me sound that way. It's just not the way to do things. And ultimately, you're selling your own talents and your own voice short by trying to sound like someone that's not you. So for my money, an EQ, and my goal using it, is to remove any sonic information, any frequencies of sound that I don't need, that aren't my voice. In other words, I'm going to use EQ to try and make myself as much like me as I can. So let's do that. The first thing that I recommend for anyone and everyone who's recording their voice is to use a high-pass filter. What's a high-pass filter, I hear you ask? Well, if I take this parametric equalizer, I go to this HP, Harry Potter high-pass filter, give it a click, and then I get this curve. Now, this curve, what it's doing, what a high-pass filter is any frequency that is higher than this curve is allowed to pass through into my recording. Conversely, sometimes these are called low cut filters, meaning any frequency that is lower than this curve is cut from my recording. And for the human voice, there's not a lot of sonic information, i.e. my voice doesn't really produce sound below a certain frequency. Usually for a lower registered voice like mine, around 50 hertz is a good starting point. And then if you have a higher frequency voice, typically a more feminine presenting voice, you may even be able to go up to 100 hertz, maybe even 120 hertz. But that depends entirely on you and your microphone, your voice, everything. It's very individual. So how can you set this? Well, we're going to run through a few different things just to show what a high-pass filter does and what it's exactly affecting. So if we play this first, this recording, with no EQ, no high-pass filter, this is what it sounds like. One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." So that's with nothing. Now we'll turn the high-pass filter on at 50 hertz and see what it sounds. If you don't have headphones on yet, I would highly recommend throwing them on just to give yourself a better idea of what's happening. One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." Great. Now let's turn it up to 80 hertz and see what happens. One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." Okay, now I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive. And at this point, if I turn it up to 130 hertz, we should start to hear my voice thin out a bit in the lower frequencies. Give it a listen. One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." Okay, now I'm going to be really extreme. This is not something that anyone would practically use for voiceover, but it'll really demonstrate what we're doing. One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." So it's very, very thin, and you can hear I'm cutting a lot of information out from my voice. So in an extreme sense, when I hear that, I know that I've gone too far. And really, less is more in all counts here. So I'll bring it back down to 50 hertz, and we'll just run through those rapid fire so we can hear one last time what's going on. So this is nothing. One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together. So you get a good sense of what exactly is going on, and honestly, between 50 hertz and 80 hertz, there's not a huge difference, but just to be safe for my voice and my use, I'll turn it down to about, 60 hertz, just as give myself some wiggle room. So if you would prefer to use a graphic equalizer over the parametric, here's how you can do a high-pass filter. Essentially, we'll manually drag each of these little nodes down and model this curve in where we position our little nodes or dots here. So I've got that curve there, and it looks somewhat like that. I can also here reduce the slope of the curve or increase the slope of the curve depending. Not necessary, but something you can play with as well. So the good news is that's all you need to do for EQ with your voiceovers. You don't need to go crazy. It's not a huge process. If all you want to do is that high-pass filter, you're right as rain. And the reason why is oftentimes the engineers that you're working with, the clients that you're sending your recordings to, they'll have people there that will fine-tune things to get them to sound exactly the way they want in the final product. So you don't have to worry about doing anything more. That's all that is really necessary. If, however, you want to be a little bit more ambitious and go a little further, here are a couple more advanced techniques if you're feeling so inclined. The first is hunting out resonant frequencies. Now, what is a resonant frequency? So sound waves, sound frequencies, have physical lengths to them. They will oscillate at specific physical lengths. So it might be 3 inches, might be 2 feet, but they all have those specific lengths in physical space. Mind-blowing, I know. And what that means is any recording space, any booth that you set yourself up in, the sound frequencies will respond to the dimensions of that booth accordingly. So if a sound wave oscillates back and forth perfectly with the width of my booth, it will bounce back and forth from wall to wall in perfect sync and build upon itself, which then gives you a sort of bell-ringing, almost resonant sound in your recordings. That's a bad version, but we can hunt those out using an EQ and just sort of tone them down a bit. Now, this is something that you need to be really, really careful on because you can easily ruin your recording and make yourself sound really thin and lose a lot of information on your voice. So at any point from here on, less is more. Less is always more with this. So how do we find a resonant frequency? Well, first, I'm going to pull a node up. This one looks perfectly fine to me. And the way I'll find it is I'm going to turn this up really significantly by about 12 to 14 decibels. I'm going to turn up the volume there. Then I'm going to take the Q or the width and I'm going to make it really sharp by turning that up as well so that I've got this sort of really tight bell curve. And next what I'm going to do is play my recording and I'm just going to sweep this frequency up and down. And I'm going to listen for any points when it doesn't sound like I've simply turned the volume up on my voice, but it sounds like I'm getting that sort of bell-like resonance. So we'll give it a listen. Again, throw those headphones on, and we'll see if we can hunt one down.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said,
So we've found one just here at about 170 hertz. If you listen to it, you can hear a sort of like that almost sounds like if you were to have a metal cylinder or something and speak into it. If you hear your voice bouncing around like that, it sounds kind of like that. Give it a listen. So this is without.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together,
So if you can hear that, great. If you can't, don't sweat it. It took me a long time to train my ears to do that, but that's how you find it. Now what I do, that I've tracked one down and pinned it, I'm just going to take the decibel level and turn it down to about -2, -3 dB. We'll split the difference, say -2.5. Then I'm going to take the Q or the width and widen it out a bit. And the reason I'm not turning it down by a significant amount, not above -3 dB, and I'm not having the Q or the width of my band here be really sharp, is gentle is usually better. If I'm aggressive in any manner, it can become apparent when I'm listening to something that I've edited in some way. So this will be really subtle again. Throw those headphones on, but we'll listen to how this has cleaned up my audio a bit. So first we'll listen without.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together,
And
One
with.
day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together,
So it's very, very subtle, but what it does is it just removes a little bit of extra information from my voice that's not quite me. And so those are the ways that you can find resonant frequencies, and there will be loads of them if you hunt it out, but I would say, in my own personal experience, if you do this more than 2, maybe 3 times, it starts to sound overly processed, in my opinion and in my experience. It might be different for you, so give it a try if you're feeling extra ambitious. But I've often found that just taking out one or two of these improves the sound enough to make it worthwhile, particularly in the lower regions. The next thing that we can do to improve our sound and clean it up a bit is if you have a sibilance issue. Sibilance is S's, sometimes the check, sally, celsi, all that sound. Sometimes with certain microphones and certain voices, certain ways of speech, sometimes certain sentences, as is indicated by Sally sell seashells, you can run into trouble where it sounds really aggressive, and you can temper that somewhat with EQ. The way that we're doing this is more or less a more surgical de-esser than using a simple de-esser plugin. Sometimes I find that de-essers can remove more information than I would prefer. So this is a great option for you in that regard. So again, going to my parametric equalizer here, I'll turn on yet another node, and we'll find that sibilant range the same exact way that we found a resonant frequency. Again, I'll boost it by a significant amount, 12 to 14 dB. I'll turn my bandwidth or my Q relatively high so it's nice and sharp. And then again, I'm going to play my recording, but I'm going to particularly listen out for S's, the sibilant sounds in speech. And as I scan through, I'm going to listen for any moments where that becomes aggressive, sharp, and grating on my ears. Now, a bit of a disclaimer. This recording is not terribly sibilant because I was using this microphone, which doesn't have that issue, but this is the way that I would track it down. So if we give it a listen here, I'll listen for a section with S's.
Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly,
That's a good with lots of S's, so I'll just highlight that, put it on repeat, and scan through.
Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, Christopher Robin.
So once I've found the frequency, same process as before, I'll drop it down to -3-ish decibels, widen out my Q a bit, and that's just going to tame the sibilant sounds in whatever recording I'm working on. Again, this recording probably doesn't need it, so I'll turn it off. And a good starting point to look for your resonant frequencies are between about 3,500 hertz up to about 8,000 hertz. So here I can see about 3,500 up to 8,000. That's usually where they live for most voices, most people. So you can sort of scan in there to hunt them out. The final thing that you might consider doing with your EQ on your recordings is if you have a darker microphone, such as this Earthworks Ethos, or say a Shure SM7B, something like that, where it doesn't have a lot of articulation, it doesn't have a lot of shine in the higher frequencies, you can add a little bit of a boost in that higher frequency if you're feeling so inclined. This is something that I would honestly rarely use because A, many microphones already have this sort of high frequency boost built in, like the TLM 103 as an example. The Sennheiser 416 is another incredibly bright and boosted microphone in this regard. But for this recording, if I boost that higher end, I'll be pretty extreme here. And I usually start it at about, between 5,000 and 8,000 in there, maybe a little higher at about 10. And I'll usually be subtle and, again, just about 3 decibels, and we'll let it play. And so this is without again.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together,
and I'll turn it on now.
Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, I saw a heffalump today, Piglet.
Now if I go really extreme and crank this up to a significant degree, this will just demonstrate what exactly we're shifting.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, I saw a heffalump today, Piglet.
So you can hear how it just brightens things up and it makes the speech sound a little bit more clear. There's a little bit more clarity. And the reason why is in these higher frequencies, that's where a lot of our articulation lives. So super resonant voices will have a lot of information in the lower end. And then we sort of use our articulation to split up words, use consonants, and a lot of those live in the higher regions, which can help to just make your speech a little bit more clear and legible to the listener. So again, if you want to try this high boosting thing, I wouldn't go below about 5,000 hertz, and I would only ever boost by between 3 and 5 dB. But always, 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 less is more, less is more, less is more. So I'll just stick with 3 dB, and I'll turn this up to there. And we'll do a quick before and after on this whole processing, just to see exactly what's going on and what we've done.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet."
Again, very subtle, but it's just cleaning things up ever so slightly to make me sound a little bit more like myself. The last thing that I'll show you is some equalizers, some plugins specifically, have what's called dynamic EQ. And so what that means is if I pull this one open, it's got the same parametric equalizer format. I've got my nodes. I can boost, I can attenuate, I can change how wide or narrow that is. I can change where the frequency is. However, this plugin has this nifty feature where I can click on this caret and I can respond to the dynamics. And what this does is it will respond and act sort of like a compressor for that specific frequency of sound. This is particularly helpful in using that de-essing method that we showed. So to be really extreme, I'll make this very wide, and I'm going to click on the gain feature, and we can see this white band here. That's what the EQ is doing currently, which is nothing. It's not boosting, it's not attenuating at all at the moment, because there's nothing for it to respond to. And because I've set it to gain, what this means is that as the loudness of specific frequencies of sound get closer to whatever threshold I've set, the EQ will respond accordingly. So watch this white bar, we'll play the audio, and you can see what it's doing.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the...
So as that white band bounces up and down, it's turning down the volume and adjusting itself based on how loud I'm being relative to this threshold. If that's sounding confusing, you can hop over and watch my video on how to use a compressor because it'll explain what exactly is going on in more depth. But it's essentially that same process in a more specific band of frequency. And so what I can do with that de-essing thing, again, boost it, make this Q really tight. I'll hunt out the frequency. Once I've found those sharp S's, I will drop this down by about 3 to 4 dB, widen this out just again so it's not aggressive, and this will just tame a very specific frequency range, namely my sibilants, and help me out there a little bit.
One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the...
So that's one extra little thing that you can give a shot if you're feeling ambitious and want to try things out for yourself. Build some skills. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions about this, anything else voiceover related, you're always welcome to drop me a line below, reach out on my website. There's coaching on my website if you'd like to work one-on-one and get more specific about how this could help you and your voice. And until the next one of these, hey, be well, and I'll see you then. Toodles.